Welcome to the first episode of the Big Sleep Out TV series. My name is Ella Stanley, and today we're going to be continuing the conversation about homelessness. The Big Sleep Out brought together people in the community about this important issue, but what does it mean to be homeless? How does someone become homeless? And what can we do about it? I am joined by guest Laura Noe, author and advocate, who is also a presenter at the Big Sleep Out. She spoke about her story and her relation with homelessness, and she's here today to share her story. So welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much for having me.
So I just want to start by introducing your powerful story about your brother, Ed. So just tell me a little bit about your brother and his early years.
Sure. So we were born and raised in Western Connecticut in Brookfield on the New York border. Middle-class family. We're fourth-generation American. We're white. Our parents both worked in corporate America. And I would say by all terms we had a normal growing up period. My brother Ed always loved the outdoors. And when we were growing up, we had nothing extraordinary happen to us that would lead us to what later became Ed's homelessness.
Yeah. So Ed grew up as a normal child, but obviously later in life you ended up losing communication with him, right, as he got older. Right. So can you tell me a little bit about that, how that happened or when that first started happening?
Sure. So Ed became homeless right around 1990. And like a lot of people who become homeless, there's trauma behind homelessness. It's not about being lazy. It's about something traumatic happening in their lives. And many homeless people struggle with mental illness, and that was exactly the case with my brother Ed. So in 1990, we had a traumatic event happen, and that event was our mom dying unexpectedly from a brain tumor. And we all struggled with it. We all were in a lot of pain. Ed struggled more so because Ed was also showing signs of schizophrenia developing. And Ed dealt with the trauma by hitchhiking across the United States from New England. And he hitchhiked from Connecticut all the way across the country to Alaska and back.
Wow. And so then later, how many years were you guys separated, would you say, without communication?
Right, so Ed became homeless in 1990. I would have intermittent contact with him when he was hitchhiking across the country. And then a span of months would go by, I didn't hear from him, and then a span of years went by, and then it was 9 years that we had no contact with each other, no phone call. I had no idea where he was. I kept expecting to get one of those terrible phone calls you hear about people getting, that they found my brother, can I identify him? And I didn't get that phone call. I got another phone call that my dad was dying. And that prompted me to put out feelers on social media to hopefully find my brother Ed and reconnect him to my dad. So that whole time period, that was about 9 years that I had no contact with Ed.
And then you found out where he was, right? And you found out that he was living homeless, right, without a home.
Exactly. So until I found him, Ella, the truth is I just thought my brother was kind of a free spirit. I thought he was just nomadic. Thought maybe he just beat to the tune of a different drummer. 2 days after I gave the eulogy at our dad's funeral, I got a text saying Ed was in a brown coat on the New Milford Green. And New Milford is on the west side of the state. I live in Branford, so it's about an hour away. I got in the car and I drove over to New Milford to find my brother homeless.
And I know, as you were saying before, it's not just about laziness, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but in Ed's case, maybe that was the way he was dealing with this immense tragedy in his life, right? He just needed to take a step back from society, and it was since he was troubled by that, correct?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, Ed, aside from our mom dying, Ed lost a friend to suicide, and then our dad subsequently sold the family home. So Ed suffered a lot of really traumatic events in a short amount of time that many people lose people in their lives, but I think when you're struggling with a serious mental illness, as Ed was and had yet to be diagnosed, I think it was more challenging for him.
Yeah.
The benefit I think that Ed had was his love of the outdoors, though. he loved and continues to love nature and specifically trees. So I do think his relationship with nature and with trees kind of sustained him. You know, they became an extension of the family tree for him.
Yeah. So you found your brother then, and you were able to reach out to him, and he started getting better, correct? Making contact. Can you just talk a little bit that process and how you were able to integrate him back into your life?
Yeah, sure. So we were separated for 9 years. We reconnected in February of 2015. Once I knew where he was in New Milford, that's 50 miles away from, I live in Brantford. I started driving from Brantford to New Milford whenever I could, which was every week or two. I'm a single mom, so I would do it whenever my schedule would allow. And I just would bring him a little brown bag of food, sandwich and an apple and some cookies, and I'd always put a note inside, "You are loved," because I wanted him to know that he had somebody out here who cared about him.
Yeah.
I also, during those journeys, realized the depth of my own ignorance, that I really knew nothing about homelessness and I knew nothing about mental illness. So I signed up for a NAMI class, National Alliance for Mental Illness, and they offer many classes, but the one I picked was the 12-week free family-to-family class, which was a terrific class in educating me on what I could expect, what the boundaries are, what does it mean to have a relative with a serious mental illness, and it was a terrific guiding class, not just the content of the class, but the people who were also taking the class.
So you would say this experience has actually very much opened your perspective, right?
Oh, Ella, enormously, absolutely. As a world I did not know. Prior to February of 2015, I knew nothing about homelessness and nothing about mental illness.
And that's why it's so amazing, too, to have people like you sharing your story, because a lot of the time I don't think enough people hear just these direct stories. We live in Guilford, which we do have a few people who are homeless, but we don't have the numbers that say we would in a city. Right. So when we're able to talk with people who are homeless or learn about these personal stories, we just gain a deeper understanding and break stereotypes that
absolutely. And I think this is how you reduce stigma, too, is by openly talking about things. You know, my background would never indicate that this was going to be something that would happen in my family.
Yeah. So in terms of your brother Ed, do you think that there are ever times when he would refuse help? Or I know sometimes if people are homeless and they're in their situation, they aren't necessarily looking, they're like, I'm fine. What would you say is most powerful in getting him to look at himself and pick up and change where his life was going?
Sure, right. So while I would journey back and forth from Brantford to New Milford, I'd find Ed most of the time, and we'd talk for maybe 3, 5, 8 minutes tops, and then he would always walk away and say he had to take care of the trees. So instead of just getting back in the car and driving home, I started to hang out in New Milford and talk to different people to kind of put the pieces together of my brother's life. And I visited with social services, with the local coffee shop, the churches, the local police department, and heard stories about how well loved my brother was, and the compassion in the community, the empathy in the community. But people had tried to move Ed beyond the homelessness. He was sleeping outside, even in severe New England winters. And they said that his independence was both a blessing and a curse. So he didn't want to give up his freedom. So he would accept food, he would accept cigarettes, he'd accept sleeping bags and clothes, but beyond that, he would push people off and say he didn't want any help.
So do you think the community element, when the community started coming together, do you think that's what really changed?
I do, Ella. I think aside from the community having just a stunning amount of compassion for my brother, there was a deeper cause working at the same time called the Community Care Team. And this is a group of professionals from soup kitchens, homeless shelters, police departments, hospitals, Danbury Hospital, New Milford Hospital, who meet regularly to talk about the most vulnerable people out on the street. And Ed was a topic of conversation for years. And he had developed a gash on his leg, and they all agreed that he would not survive another New England winter. So they came together and put a strategy 4th and approached Ed about going to the hospital for help. And Ed, this was October of 2015, so this is 8 months after Ed and I had reconnected. And I think it was a combination of having the community care team circle around him. They were not aggressive, they weren't pushy. Ed always had choice. And I think I came back into his life, and I think Ed just had a lot of people around him who respected him, who listened to him, who cared for him, and wanted to help him. And I think that's what shifted Ed to say yes.
Yeah. And do you think his story, what drove him into homelessness and what helped him out, do you think his story is similar to many other people who find themselves in that situation?
Absolutely. I think Ed's story is very similar to how a lot of people wind up being homeless. I think there's traumatic events. I think family members often get burnt out. They get tired. They don't want to deal with it anymore. And then the homeless people just find themselves untethered from love and caring. And then they find themselves on the street, which is very harsh.
I think that element of just being there, treating them like people, is a very important thing. I know through the Sleep Out, we've always had this motto, kind of people who are homeless, not homeless people, not treating them differently, talking to them like a person who has children, talents, similar things just to you and me.
Right.
So I think when the community is able to look at that person and treat them as equals, I think that's very powerful.
Right, and they have family, they have a sister, they have parents.
Yeah.
Right, they were children at one point. Right, seeing them as people is so important, Ella.
And that's one thing I think the Sleep Out was able to do, too, for younger kids. So when they hear these stories, your story, when they hear from men from Columbus House who are homeless, and they start to see all these things that make them just any normal person, you might pass them or talk to them and not ever know that they were living on the street.
Absolutely.
It connects us, and that's a very powerful thing.
It is, it's very powerful.
And what would you say in terms of stereotypes that people have? What would your response be to people who might be a little bit afraid to approach someone who's homeless or have stereotypes?
Right. So a lot of the stereotypes about homeless people are that they're violent, that they're substance abusers, and many of them are. Many of them drink or use drugs. In my brother's case, he did not. My brother had this affinity with nature. So I think nature really played a role where other people may have turned to drugs or alcohol. I would say, you have to be careful because, if someone is on drugs or drinking, you can get hurt. So you have to think of your safety as well. You can't just be completely blind and selfless. But I think the most important thing you can give homeless people, or anybody, frankly, we shouldn't even separate these people out, is your attention. So I would encourage people to make eye contact. And you don't have to get close, but you can look at someone so that you can see them and let them know you see them. And just, even if you just nod or, hand over your heart or just some sort of indication that you feel their humanity and I feel your situation. And if they feel that empathy off of you and do you have any money, do you have anything? I would say I often carry something in my car, a little brown bag with an apple or crackers, nothing that's going to get bad in my car, something that's got a longer shelf life, and just offer them a piece of fruit or some crackers. I wouldn't suggest giving money.
Yeah.
But I'd say attention and compassion, and if you want, you could give them fruit or some other food.
I think you're right, showing that connection is really important because sometimes when people, and just anyone in general, especially with a mental issue, feels a disconnect from others, they might turn to other things to find connection in drugs or substance abuse, in your brother's case, nature.
Absolutely.
So just showing some sort of compassion, as you're saying, can change the course of someone's day and even of their life.
Right. I just think apply it to how you and I operate.
Yeah.
What does it feel like when somebody doesn't look at you, and what does it feel like when someone does look at you? It's simple as eye contact. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So after you had this experience with your brother, you've taken this so much further.
Yeah.
And one way you've done this is through your writing.
Yes.
So would you talk just a little bit about how you came to the decision to write a book about it?
Sure. So this is like, my brother's a miracle to me, right? So this is, 25 years of homelessness. And once he started saying yes to hospitals, he said yes to medication, he said yes to housing, he's now got a job. So 25 years of living outside, and in a few short years, my brother has completely turned his life around, which has, in doing so, has completely turned my life around. I'm a corporate dropout, for lack of a better descriptor. I spent 20 plus years in Manhattan working with architects and interior designers, and I loved that industry, but I left it to write my first book. And I was fortunate while writing that book that I had all this time to slow down, which is exactly what my brother came back into my life. So I actually had the most important thing to give my brother, which was time and attention. So while I was reconnecting with my brother, and while he was saying yes to all the help and services and shifting his life around, I was keeping a lot of notes, not because I was thinking I was going to write another book, mostly because I was so in a world that I did not know, that there were acronyms I had no idea. There were doctors saying names of drugs. I'm like, I got to go look that up. At some point I became his co-conservator, so I needed to learn that legalese. What does it mean to be a conservator? So I kept really tight notes every meeting I had, mostly because I was like, this is a very important job. I don't want to screw something up. And I've always loved writing as a source of release for me. It helps me heal, helps me understand myself better. And as I started to write this, and I'm in a writing group, and as I started to write this, I'm in two writing groups. The women in the writing groups were like, Laura, this is a book. And because I was just sharing just because it was cathartic for me, much like talking about this is cathartic. And they said, this is a book. So with their encouragement, I started to look at it differently. Instead of just a series of essays I was writing to feel better, I started to think, oh, this is a body of work that has a bigger meaning behind it.
When you were writing, did you think that this would be a powerful way to share the story, or when did it transition to that eventually?
You know, Ella, it's like with the first book, you just have to let some of the words come out and see where it takes you. So it's challenging because I want an outline, I want to know, I come from the business world, so I want to make sure things get done, and this is the exact opposite process. This is so organic. The good news is it's surprised me where it's gone. So the title of the book is Tree Man, which was my brother's street name when he lived outside because of his affinity and passion for the trees. And so throughout the book, I find myself using a lot of tree language, tree metaphors, tree symbolism, and I talk a lot about the family tree, how it being bigger than just the people that you grew up with.
Yeah. So besides writing your book, in what other ways, I know you do so much in the community just to advocate for helping people who are homeless, what are some other key ways that you've gotten involved in this?
Sure. Well, thank you for including me in the Big Sleep Out, Ella. That was terrific. So I participated in the last 2 years, which is a wonderful way to get the word out. Because here I am living in Connecticut with a Connecticut story, a success story. I will pretty much talk to anyone. Anybody who wants to hear the story, I'll share it with. So I've gone to high schools and shared this with high school students. I've shared this with police officers in crisis intervention training. So they're learning how to deal with people who are homeless, who have serious mental illnesses. I've worked with the Coalition to End Homelessness. They had a recent annual event. I've spoken in front of land trusts. So I will pretty much talk to anyone who wants to hear about homelessness, mental illness, or the woods, or trees. Yeah.
And it really is amazing too. I know when we first got into contact for the Sleep Out, just the fate that had to happen there. Just that you're driving by, you happen to see our banner,
your sign in
front
of St. George,
and it fit perfectly with our mission, and it's added so much to what we do.
Yes.
So in your travels going around talking to people, students, could you just comment a little bit what it's like to share and I guess see changes in the way people view it based on your story?
Right. So I think a lot of people are surprised that homelessness came out of my background. Right. We come from pretty much a classic middle class family. So you don't think you think there's gonna be some horrible, skeleton in the closet. I would think that's the first thing people think. I think that people don't associate traumatic events with homelessness. I think a lot more people are close to being homeless than we realize. I mean, one snafu, one you know, big event in your life, you could run out of savings. A lot of people live very lean these days, right? I mean, certainly we know that our country is polarized right now, so we have a lot of wealth and we have a lot of people who are slipping into poverty. So I think it's actually growing.
Yeah, and it's great to be able to portray it to people just so they can feel, when they feel themselves, how they feel closer to someone who is falling into homelessness.
Yeah.
They are able to just have more compassion and understanding, because there are so many factors that go into it.
Absolutely. It's complex. It's complex and complicated. But what's simple is the need and the desire to just love people and reach out and see people as people, like you said earlier, and just know that that could happen to me.
And do you think your message is getting across to youth that you talk? Do you think they understand?
I do. Ella, you and your generation, my son is 19, give me so much hope, because you care about issues, you talk about them openly, you're doing the Big Sleep Out. It's tremendous in terms of raising awareness. I feel very hopeful about this because of your generation and for people like you, Ella, truly.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So a little bit on a different note. So in terms of politics, or I guess the environment now, attitude towards homelessness, what is it in your knowledge, because you are very active, what is happening now? What are some changes that are going on? Or
well, I think as I mentioned earlier, I think we're so polarized right now. So polarized simply means an us and them, right? It's a win-lose. It's a competitive mindset, and I think that we cannot move ahead with that kind of competitive mindset. If we follow what the trees do, which Peter Wolleben spoke of beautifully in his book, The Hidden Life of Trees, the trees don't compete for sunlight or for water. If you need sunlight and I have it, I make room for you. If you need water and I have it, I give you water. The trees collaborate. They don't compete. And I think that's what we have to do nationally, is to help each other out. We don't need to live so isolated and insulated. We need to see our neighbor as ourselves and help out.
And that leads a little bit into my next question also. In your ideal, perfect world, if you had all the sources you needed, what would be your solution that you would think would be able to help people like this and solve this issue of homelessness?
So the fast answer, but it's super complicated, the fast answer is affordable housing. Okay, but that's, again, just like homelessness and mental illness, that's complex. So that's a fast answer, and then so what does that mean? It means providing, you see a big trend on these micro houses. These houses that are like 800 or 900 square feet. I live in a 700 square foot house in Bradford. It's perfect for my son and I and dog. I think we need to see more building going up in that size and lower price tags. We live in an expensive state.
Yeah. So also through the Sleep Out, you got in contact with Columbus House, right?
Yes.
Had you before then had you known about the work they did, or?
I knew about them peripherally, but thanks to you and the Big Sleep Out, I've got connected to them, and what a great group of people they are. And I've gone down to New Haven and toured their facility, and it's beautiful.
Yeah. What was it like to see that for the first time, or meet some people from Columbus House?
It's humbling to go into a space like that.
Yeah.
It's very humbling. It's very monastic and simple and clean. The people that work there are very warm, they're very loving, they're not judgmental, but they're hopeful and they're real. So I thought it was tremendous, and I would recommend it to anybody who just wants maybe a dose of real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Was there anything else that you would like to touch upon?
I would say, homelessness and mental illness, they're not dark and dead end. There's a lot of hope. I would say if we come together and collaborate and work together as communities, people like my brother Ed can be lifted up and out. And my brother is working full time now. He came to visit my son and I last weekend for Memorial Day weekend. He kayaks with us. So it's not, a dead end. You can't give up on people.
Yeah. And Ed was lucky to have you there, too, to pick him up. And as a community, the work that Columbus House does is so important, because some people don't have those kinds of connections.
Some people don't have somebody who loves them and cares for them. And Ed is lucky to have me, and I'm lucky to have Ed as well. It's great to have my brother back in my life.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. And I think being able to take the time, as you were saying, to slow down. It's easy to get caught up in busy day-to-day life, but to slow down, to go to the green and sleep for a night in the cold and even the drizzling rain, and just really gain that deep understanding of, wow, this could be me, how would it feel like to be in that situation, is important.
Absolutely. I would recommend, when you do it next year, I would recommend people come down and do that overnight, because it's a deep meditative evening. It's very humbling. You realize how fragile the world is, how vulnerable, and how connected we all really are to each other, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining us
Ella.
today,
Thank you. And thank you for doing the Big Sleep
Thank
Out.
you for opening your heart and sharing your story.
Anytime.
You've
Appreciate
touched so
it.
many people.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you for joining us today. We'll be here again with some other guests, some other presenters from the Sleep Out, to talk about other facets of homelessness, other ways you can get involved, and other things that are going on right now in our town and beyond relating to homelessness. So tune in again to learn more, and thank you for joining us.